I recall sitting alone in the dark, at a powerful nexus of arcane energy. I meditated for 6 days and 6 nights, until an agonizing voice from beyond the void offered me terrible knowledge at an agonizing price. This, of course, has nothing to do with Pathfinder. I work in public education, and allow me to tell you that teacher unions have some really strange rules. Today we will discuss Treasure Vault's Blighted Boons for Pathfinder 2nd Edition on today's episode of The Local Disaster Tour Guide. Hello travelers and tourists, my name is Mark and I am the local disaster tour guide. That's right, I am a storyteller here to offer you some items that offer incredible power at a terrible price. I guess capitalism is working. Welcome to a journey through the fantastic world of TTRPGs like Pathfinder and Starfinder, and welcome to a discussion of Blighted Boons, a special type of item that was introduced in the book Treasure Vault for Pathfinder 2nd Edition. It is October, which means Halloween is rapidly approaching, so for my videos this month, I'm going to be talking about various spooky subjects, and I wanted to kick off our spooky conversations by talking about Blighted Boons, a special type of item that is found in Treasure Vault. There is a very well-known story beat that appears in a lot of fantasy writing, and especially in a lot of dark fantasy writing, the idea of power at a cost. And that is the exact type of story that Blighted Boons are expected to represent. The idea behind these items is that those who partake in their power gain rapid access to special abilities that can help them, but the longer they remain under the influence of these items, the more terrible the price that they pay will become. Now, at this point in time, I am only aware of 4 actual Blighted Boons that have been published for Pathfinder 2e. They are the Elder Seed, the Void Fragment, the Heartblood Ring, and the Phoenix Cinder, which are all featured in Treasure Vault. But as we talk about these today, we're going to see that Paizo has given us a really good framework for players and storytellers who might want to develop their own Blighted Boons for use at their gaming table. For this video, I'm going to start with an overview of how Blighted Boons work. I'll talk about some of the common mechanics for Blighted Boons and some of the general guidelines that players and game masters will want to be aware of, and then in the latter part of the video I will do an overview of the 4 published Blighted Boons that can be found in Treasure Vault. Now, because each of these published items do come with a little bit of story attached to them, I am aware that some players might not want to know all of those details, so before we get to the individual discussions, I will throw up a spoiler warning in case you want to avoid that. But if you are interested in including items like this in your own game, definitely send your game master this way, because I think Paizo has given us some great tools to work with, and I think Blighted Boons represent an interesting story niche that doesn't often get explored in Pathfinder 2e, so I think they're very interesting. Of course, before we dive into all of that, don't forget to do the stuff that helps to support this channel. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. You can check out my free Discord and my Patreon. All of those will be linked in the video description below. And as always, the best thing you can do to support these videos is join in the conversation. Let me know what you think of these Blighted Boons, and let me know if you would be interested in using these Blighted Boons or designing a similar item for your own game. I'd love to hear your thoughts. With all that out of the way, let's get started. Alright, so let's talk about Blighted Boons. Now, if you're interested in reading up on Blighted Boons, you should check out pages 186 to 189 of the Treasure Vault, And I'll also be throwing a link to the Blighted Boons section of Archives of Nethys down into the video description, so if you're interested in getting some more details, those are the places you can go to learn more. However, the basic premise of a Blighted Boon is pretty easy to understand. It is an item that offers incredible power, but you pay a terrible price as the effect of that item progresses over time. Now, they don't use this specific terminology in discussing Blighted Boons, but I think this is probably the easiest way to understand them mechanically. I feel like Blighted Boons are best viewed as an item that functions much like an affliction in Pathfinder 2e, with a few special notes attached. As previously mentioned, there are currently only 4 Blighted Boons that have been published for Pathfinder 2e, and they can all be found in the book Treasure Vault, though this is very obviously a type of item that Paizo could easily develop more examples of in the future, and if I'm being honest, I'd love to see some more examples of this kind of item. I think they could lead to some really interesting stories and some really fun games. So if there's anybody from Paizo listening to this video, if you feel like dropping a few more of these in some future adventure paths, I wouldn't complain. Mechanically, when you're discussing Blighted Boons, there are 3 essential things you need to understand: partaking, processing, and purging. So let's talk about those here. Up first is the idea of partaking. In order for a character to benefit from a Blighted Boon, the first thing that they have to do is partake in that Blighted Boon. Now, exactly what partaking means from one item to another could vary a little bit. 3 of the current examples that we have involve the character deliberately eating or drinking something, and the final currently published option involves the character essentially accepting a sort of mental contract. But in each of those cases, there is this very clear idea that a character is deliberately doing something. Blighted Boons, for the most part, are not intended to be something that gets forced on a character, but rather something that a character chooses to do and ultimately pays a price for. In fact, one of the Blighted Boons that we're going to talk about, the Elder Seed, when you pick up the Elder Seed, you immediately know exactly what it does and the exact price that you're going to pay if you use it, meaning that any character who is ingesting an Elder Seed does so fully cognizant of exactly what they're getting out of the deal. With the other 3 items that have been published, there is a little less clear-cut knowledge up front, but even with those items, should a character encounter one of these Blighted Boons, the general power and nature of the items should give a character at least some pause as they consider whether or not it is truly safe to indulge in whatever this item has to be. So if you're a storyteller watching this video, one of the big pieces of advice that I would give you for Blighted Boons is do not force these on your players. I think they can make for some interesting choices and storylines. I think there are a lot of players who would appreciate the choice, but I feel like a lot of players would be very upset if Blighted Boons were forced on them because of the nature of the items. So when it comes to partaking in Blighted Boons, please remember that these are very much intended to be known deliberate choices that the characters make, even if some of the knowledge surrounding the choice might be partial or incomplete. To that effect, there is actually a rule around partaking in Blighted Boons that says if a character ever partakes in a boon and they didn't intend to, or if someone tried to force it upon them, there is actually a saving throw allowed that allows the character to vomit up the item that they ingested or push out the mental intrusion, essentially refusing the boon from the very beginning. A simple success would allow the character to completely avoid partaking in the boon, negating any benefits and all drawbacks that would be associated with it. There may be a few storytelling use cases where a character might need to reject a boon that someone tries to force upon them, but honestly the saving throw to do this is pretty weak, and it's intended to be something that a player character will most likely pass if it's something that their character does not want to be a part of. But moving past partaking, let's go ahead and talk about progression. Assuming that a character willingly partakes in one of these Blighted Boons, or in the very rare instance that they fail a save to throw off a boon that somehow gets forced upon them, what do the actual rules surrounding a Blighted Boon look like? Well, this is where I say that the item in question acts very much like an affliction in Pathfinder 2e. If you're familiar with things like diseases, poisons, curses, stuff like that, then you will very quickly recognize the design of Blighted Boons, because upon partaking with a Blighted Boon, the character immediately enters Boon Stage 1, where they get some sort of benefit or benefits from the item that they just ingested. Now, the exact benefits will obviously vary from item to item, and the more powerful of a Blighted Boon that you're using, the more powerful the benefits are going to be up front, but the first stage of the boon is very clearly intended to be all benefits. None of the Blighted Boons that currently exist have any sort of negative repercussions during Boon Stage 1. It is all upside. Then, after a particular period of time, the character must make another saving throw, and if they fail this saving throw, they progress to Boon Stage 2. This pattern will continue, by the way. After a certain period of time in Boon Stage 2, they need another saving throw, and should they fail, they progress to Boon Stage 3, and then yet again, after a certain period of time, they get another saving throw, and if they fail again, they progress to Boon Stage 4. Starting at Boon Stage 2 and 3, this is where the negative repercussions start coming in. Now, at every stage, the powers associated with the Blighted Boon are going to increase in some noticeable fashion. The abilities that they got at Boon Stage 1 will get better. But, starting in Boon Stage 2, some detriments start to sneak in, and then at Boon Stage 3, as the powers grow to their highest extent, the consequences of those powers also get very, very noticeable. However, Boon Stage 4 is the easiest to describe because a character who arrives at Boon Stage 4 immediately and irrevocably dies. And honestly, in most cases, their body and soul are violently destroyed in the process. Yes, that's right, a Blighted Boon will always lead to a character's death unless they can successfully purge the condition. First up, let's discuss that saving throw DC that determines whether or not you progress from one boon stage to the next. The DC for that is always going to be equal to 10 plus your character's level plus the boon stage of the Blighted Boon that you are currently in, and then finally, every time you attempt the saving throw, if you succeed, it increases the next saving throw by +1. So if you succeed twice, +2, then +3, slowly increasing in difficulty until you inevitably fail that save. Now, what does this translate to practically? Well, if you run the numbers out, what this means is the saving throw DC to prevent future stages is typically going to start out in what would be classified as an easy save for your given character level, and in fact, the first few saves at every boon stage are probably going to stay in the easy range of the difficulty band. The intention is for your character with typical rolls to normally be able to make a few of these saving throws and prevent the progression of the Blighted Boon for at least some period of time. As long as you're making your saving throws, the boon stage does not progress, and given the relatively low DC of the saves, that's honestly something that most characters should be able to reasonably do at least a few times. However, you may notice an important distinction here. I've mentioned that the benefit of a success is the boon stage does not increase. I didn't mention anything about actually shaking the Blighted Boon. A critical success on this saving throw has no additional effect. It's just like a regular success. You stave off the advancement of the Blighted Boon for a little bit longer. Conversely, when it comes to failure and critical failure, there's only one effect here. Advance the stage by 1. A Blighted Boon moves at a fairly predictable, if slow pace, very slowly but pretty reliably corrupting the character who partook in the boon, eventually leading to that character's death. Now, I will say that there is a little bit of variety from Blighted Boon to Blighted Boon. For example, it doesn't spell out in the base rules if it's a fortitude save, reflex, will. The specific save in question seems to be very much tied to the type of Blighted Boon that you're interacting with. So, for example, the Void Fragment very clearly fits with the idea of will saves to prevent the boon from progressing. But the specific save in question is very much going to vary from item to item. And the other thing to note is the exact amount of time that you need to wait before rolling a save is going to vary a little bit as well. Speaking very generally, the typical Boon Stage 1 is going to last about a week, maybe a little bit more, before a saving throw is required. The typical Boon Stage 2 is going to last about a month, and the typical Boon Stage 3 is typically going to last about a month as well. So, should a character fail all of their saving throws against Boon Stage progression on the initial save, even in a worst case scenario, a character should go about 2 months and 1 week before they are ultimately killed by the Blighted Boon that they have partaken in. However, as I mentioned, the saving throws do start out as easy for your level, so while the results are very much going to be contingent upon your dice rolls and how they fall, I think the typical character could probably expect to go somewhere between 6 to 10 months dealing with a Blighted Boon before they pay the ultimate price. This means that any character who partakes in a Blighted Boon is on a clock, but they don't necessarily know how long that clock is going to be. A character that has chosen to partake in a Blighted Boon is slowly and inevitably moving towards their own demise. Which brings up an important question: can you actually reverse the effects of a Blighted Boon? And the answer is technically yes, but not likely. Successful saving throws only prolong how long you stave off the consequences of the Blighted Boon. They don't actually reverse the progression in any way, and a character cannot naturally, on their own power, expel or otherwise shrug off the effects of a Blighted Boon. In fact, it's specifically noted that Blighted Boons are treated as artifact-level items for purposes of things like Dispel Magic. In case you're unfamiliar with what that means the counteract check is going to fail and the Blighted Boon is sticking around. You cannot roll a saving throw high enough, and you cannot roll a counteract check powerful enough to get rid of a Blighted Boon. The only way to get rid of a Blighted Boon is through a unique action called Purging. Every Blighted Boon is going to come with its own unique purge condition that must be met, and a character who wants to shake off the effects of a Blighted Boon must undertake a specific quest effectively in order to do so, and each of these quests or each of these activities are very clearly intended to be something that's going to be difficult to do. Blighted Boons are very powerful, so the inevitable death portion of the Blighted Boon should be something that a character really has to work overtime to successfully shake off. So that is an overview of how Blighted Boons work. Before we move on to the specific Blighted Boons that Paizo has published, I want to talk a little bit about designing your own Blighted Boons. The 4 current Blighted Boons that have been published range from item level 11 up to item level 16. But if I'm being honest, you could probably adapt Blighted Boons to almost any level in Pathfinder 2e. Storytellers, I would probably recommend avoiding really low-level Blighted Boons. I don't feel like Blighted Boon stories would work very well from like levels 1 to level 5, but some weaker Blighted Boon options starting around mid-levels like level 6 on up could potentially be workable. The cool thing here is Paizo has given us a very obvious format that we can work with. Every Blighted Boon is going to have 4 stages. The first stage is all upside. The second stage is a mixture of upside and downside. The third stage is a little bit more upside, but a lot of downside. And then finally, stage 4 is death. Design-wise, that's pretty easy to mirror, and as a storyteller, if you're creating your own Blighted Boon, that's definitely something that's easy to do. Also, since they've given us a very clear formula for how to calculate DCs around Blighted Boons, you can very easily adjust them to any level that you want to drop them into a game. Really, you're just picking a good mixture of benefits and downsides and deciding when to drop them on the item. And as long as you're keeping that relatively appropriate to the level of the item in question, the design process here is not that hard. The two main things that you really want to think about as a storyteller are, one, the story of what the item is and how a character might interact with it, and then number two, the purge conditions. When we talk about the specific items here in a moment, you're going to see that the purge conditions are pretty universally very specific and very hard to do. So when you come up with these items, you want to make it where purging the item from a character is going to be a serious character arc. Still, as long as you're following these general guidelines that Paizo has already put in place, designing new Blighted Boons should be pretty easy to do, and if it's something you're interested in a storyteller, I recommend giving it a shot because, again, I think you could get some interesting stories out of this. But that's the general overview of how Blighted Boons work. Now I'm going to talk about the specific Blighted Boons that have been published. For players who don't want to spoil themselves on specifics, you may want to step away from the video here, but for players or storytellers interested in learning a little bit more, let's dive into the options that Paizo has given us. So for this video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in order by the published level of the items that Paizo gave us in the Treasure Vault. So first up, we have the Elder Seed. And of the various Blighted Boons that have been published, this is probably the least terrible option that a player might want to go for, and would fit really well with any kind of primal character. In fact, the general story of an Elder Seed is that it is something that is grown or developed by powerful primal casters, and that allows a partaker to undergo potent magical changes that might allow them to defend an important magical site, or protect their community, or otherwise accomplish a significant goal that would be important to their character. So, for example, if you have a druid who wants to go out in a blaze of glory, an Elder Seed could totally be a way to pull that off. Elder Seeds are a level 11 item, and the basic description of what this does is, if you ingest this thing, it is slowly going to turn you into a tree. Now, of all of the items discussed in the Blighted Boons section, the Elder Seed is the one that notes very specifically, a character who picks this item up immediately knows exactly what it does and exactly what the consequences are. So we do get a little bit of a guideline from Paizo here that with lower level Blighted Boons, character knowledge is very important. Anyone who partakes in the item definitely knows what they're getting into. As for a character that partakes in an Elder Seed, starting at Boon Stage 1, they're going to gain resistance to bludgeoning and piercing damage, and they're also going to gain access to a number of primal spells usable once per day. These spells are Speak with Animals, Speak with Plants, Enlarge, and Web. Once you progress to Boon Stage 2 with the Elder Seed, your character also gains Low Light Vision and command of the Arboreal Language, and then finally, at Stage 3 of the Elder Seed, you gain access to a more powerful version of the Enlarge spell. Of course, you're also going to pick up some downsides along the way. Starting at Boon Stage 2, you gain the Clumsy condition and a penalty on initiative checks, and if you advance to Boon Stage 3, your character becomes slowed during combat and gains a weakness to fire damage and axes. Essentially, the further along you go, the more tree-like your character becomes. You become more resilient to lots of forms of damage and you can use some powerful primal magic, but you also become susceptible to many of the things that could harm a forest. Of course, should you reach Stage 4, your body completely becomes a tree and you are no more. Next up, let's talk Purge conditions. Because of the various Blighted Boons that have been published, the Elder Seed definitely has the easiest Purge condition. What you have to do is your character has to seek out a sufficiently powerful Fae, Arboreal, or Archdruid that is capable of placing a geas upon your character, and while they are on the quest mandated by that ritual, the Boon stage of the Elder Seed cannot progress, and once you complete that quest, you will naturally regurgitate the Elder Seed, ending all of the accumulated effects. It is worth noting that a character that dies under the effects of an Elder Seed can be tended to by an Arboreal, and after a span of 3 years and 3 days, be used to produce a new Elder Seed that future characters might partake of themselves. Now I do want to stress for storytellers that the purge condition on this Elder Seed should still remain pretty significant. In order for characters to successfully get rid of this Elder Seed, they need to find a Fey, Arboreal, or Archdruid that is higher level than them, and they need to perform a suitably serious task for that creature in order to ultimately expel the Elder Seed. Translation: this should not be an easy thing to do, because finding level 12 or higher creatures that are capable of counteracting these effects should not be commonplace inside of your setting. You should still have a pretty serious campaign arc ready to go if your player is trying to purge an Elder Seed. Still, of the various Blighted Boons currently available, the Elder Seed is the easiest to shake off, and is probably the nicest option that you could present to players if you're interested in toying around with these kinds of stories. Up next, we have the level 13 item, the Void Fragment, which is the result of a person deliberately attempting to communicate with creatures from beyond the void. While the specifics of accomplishing this are only hinted at, they give the idea of meditating at a nexus of arcane energy for 6 days and 6 nights. Paizo does specifically note that characters who attempt to find a Void Fragment frequently befall some sort of horrible fate rather than actually successfully finding one. This introduces the idea that as you get to higher and higher level Blighted Boons, even the prospect of finding one of these items should become a very serious challenge. But assuming a character successfully contacts an entity from the void and is able to conjure a Void Fragment, a character can choose to partake in the Void Fragment simply by touching it, lowering their mental and spiritual defenses, and drawing that energy into themselves, and as a result, they will gain several very significant mental powers. They'll gain the effects of the tongue spell and the ability to use telepathy. They will actually be under a mind blank effect as a result, and they can even do some limited teleportation through the use of the Void Fragment. If they move up to Boon Stage 2, they also gain an ability called Thought Sense, and anytime they use the teleportation effect of the Void Fragment, wherever they land is affected by the spell Strange Geography. Now, Strange Geography is technically a legacy spell that was published in the Advanced Player's Guide for Pathfinder 2e. I don't know if a remastered version of that spell exists or not. If I can find a remastered version, I'll link it. Otherwise, I'll link the old version of the spell. But Strange Geography is a pretty interesting spell to just be able to drop on a battlefield by teleporting in. And then, finally, if your character advances to Boon Stage 3, you actually get improved telepathy, increasing the range that you can use that ability. So, essentially, the Void Fragment will give you the ability to warp space, read minds, and influence thoughts. Of course, there's going to be some downsides that come with this. Starting at Boon Stage 2, your character will begin to suffer terrible perception penalties as the overwhelming cacophony of thoughts around you cancels your ability to focus on the world. Additionally, if you move to Boon Stage 3, every time you begin combat, there is a chance that you will become confused, acting erratically in the early stages of battle. And should your character reach Boon Stage 4 or die while under the effects of a Void Fragment, you vanish into the void and your body is replaced by a terrible aberration that makes its way into reality. I'm sure the rest of your party won't mind a bit. So, assuming that you've come to realize that the consequences of that Void Fragment are more than you wish to pay, how do you actually purge a Void Fragment from your character? Well, in order to do this, you must seek out a suitably powerful aberration, and the first thing you must do is kill it. Then, you and your allies must perform the Rest Eternal ritual, and assuming that you successfully use the Rest Eternal ritual on that aberration, in banishing that aberration, you will also banish the Void Fragment that is influencing your character. The difficulty in accomplishing both of these things should be pretty apparent, but given a reasonably successful hunt, you should be able to purge a Void Fragment as well. Moving on, next we have the Heartblood Ring, which is a special ring created by a vampire offering a terrible gift to potential allies. I'll go ahead and say that of the Blighted Boons presented, this is the one I think will actually be easiest to use in most campaigns. If you have a particular vampire lord that your PCs might want to ally with, a Heartblood Ring would be really easy to work into the game and could make for some very interesting choices for your players. The Heartblood Ring that is recorded in Treasure Vault is a level 15 item, and immediately upon drinking the blood that is found in a Heartblood Ring, the partaker gains the effects of a regenerate spell that also attempts to counteract every disease and poison affecting that character. Once this period of regeneration ends, the character gains several other benefits, such as permanent fast healing, a bonus to certain saving throws, and they no longer age thanks to the power of the blood they consumed. As the character moves up into Boon Stage 2 or 3, their eyes begin to adjust to the dark just like vampires, and they potentially gain low light or possibly even dark vision as a result. Of course, the downsides here should be pretty predictable. Starting at Boon Stage 2, any character that has been affected by a Heartblood Ring is going to find light to be just kind of repulsive. And as the Boon stage progresses higher and higher, the character is going to take progressively worse penalties anytime they are in areas of bright light. Additionally, while the fast healing is pretty potent, their actual maximum HP is going to be reduced almost as if they have the drained condition. They don't actually have the drained condition, so beware that could double up if it hits you, but essentially their maximum HP is going to be penalized as a result. And finally, as the Boon stages progress, anyone affected by a Heartblood Ring will also gain the Doomed condition. Should a character die while under the influence of a Heartblood Ring, either through natural causes or by reaching Boon Stage 4, they turn into a bloody mist, sink into the ground, and rise days later as a true vampire. Now, surprisingly for the various Blighted Boons that Paizo has published, the Purge condition for the Heartblood Ring is going to sound very simple on its surface. The instant that you destroy the Vampire Lord that created the Heartblood Ring, the power of that Heartblood Ring instantly and completely ends. So, should you destroy the creator? Well, there are no further consequences. However, it can't be quite that easy, and it does specifically note in the Heartblood Ring description that anyone who is benefiting from a Heartblood Ring takes a -2 penalty on all saving throws against any effect coming from the vampire that created that particular ring. In other words, it's not that easy to overthrow your master if you're trying to spare your own body and soul from the consequences. And let's go ahead and be honest here, a vampire lord capable of creating a Heartblood Ring is probably already going to be a formidable foe even before you throw those saving throw penalties on top of the situation. The final item that Paizo gives us is called the Phoenix Cinder, and this particularly evil item is associated with people who attempt to interrupt and then corrupt the natural rebirth cycle of a phoenix. Should a phoenix die and its essence be trapped in the ashes that result in such a way that the phoenix cannot be reborn, then someone could choose to partake of the Phoenix Cinders and gain numerous phoenix-like powers as a result. However, as should be clearly obvious here, this is an unquestionably evil act, and anyone who chooses to do so is very much corrupting their own soul in the process. A Phoenix Cinder is considered to be a level 16 item, and much like the Heartblood Ring, immediately upon partaking of Phoenix Cinders, the character benefits from a regeneration spell and gains a limited period of complete fire immunity. You may notice with both the Heartblood Ring and the Phoenix Cinder, as level 15 and 16 items respectively, that there is an initial burst effect that doesn't last very long but is very powerful, and then you move into the more permanent Boon Stage 1 effects. If you're dealing with very high-level Blighted Boons, you want to consider having kind of 2 stages to the initial benefits, just to help convey how powerful these items are intended to be. So with the Phoenix Cinder, you start out with a regeneration, you start out with temporary fire immunity, and then when you move into regular Boon Stage 1 for the Phoenix Cinders, you're going to get fast healing, fire resistance, some nice bonuses to some of your saving throws, and a variety of fire-based powers that you can use at certain intervals. As you move through the boon stages, those fire powers will be available more and more frequently. However, there are some downsides associated with absorbing the power of a phoenix into your body, and one of those is pyromania. This is actually really fun. As a character moves into the higher boon stages of the Phoenix Cinder, they have to start making saving throws to avoid just randomly setting things on fire. Their obsession with fire slowly takes over their body and mind and could drive them to do some pretty dangerous things. Also, much like the Heartblood Ring, while you have some potent fast healing, the actual maximum hit points that your character possesses will be penalized as the strain on your body becomes more and more severe. Additionally, and quite predictably, you will also gain a weakness to cold, and much like the Heartblood Ring giving a vampiric aversion to light, someone who partakes of a Phoenix Cinder will gain an aversion to cold, meaning that they have to make saving throws or actively avoid experiencing cold environments. Should a character die while under the effects of a Phoenix Cinder, or again should they reach Boon Stage 4, their ultimate demise is particularly spectacular as from their body a dark phoenix erupts. The natural rebirth process of the phoenix has been corrupted and it is no longer a good creature. There's a small chance it might be a neutral creature, but in most cases it will actually erupt as an evil creature, and in every circumstance, the newborn phoenix will have an innate desire to get revenge on any creature resembling the one that attempted to interrupt its cycle of rebirth. Basically, if a Phoenix Cinder kills you, you've dropped a new villain into your campaign. I love both the arrival of the aberration for the Void Fragment and the arrival of a Dark Phoenix for the Phoenix Cinder. I think these make for some great consequences that go beyond just the death of your character. And should a character fall to one of these Blighted Boons, I think the story impact is amazing here, so I absolutely love these details. Now let's ask the question, how do you actually purge the effects of a Phoenix Cinder? Because this easily is the most difficult of the four presented. In order to purge a Phoenix Cinder, you actually have to essentially rescue a phoenix. You need to find the ashes of a phoenix that is being prevented from being reborn in one fashion or another, and then you must complete a very specific ritual in an attempt to rescue and restore that phoenix. If your effort is successful and that phoenix cycle of rebirth continues, then you will successfully purge the Phoenix Cinders from your own body, allowing the phoenix that you hindered from being reborn to return to its normal cycle. Allow me to say, there is a lot of narrative weight here. Number one, the idea of finding a second phoenix that can't be reborn, that in and of itself almost feels like it should have the unique tag in a given setting. That is something that should be very rare. And then the narrative weight of undoing for another phoenix what you have done to the first phoenix, there should just be some real gravitas to a story like that. And success is definitely not guaranteed here, so I think it leads to a very interesting story. But with that, we've actually covered all four of the Blighted Boons that Paizo offers: the Elder Seed, the Void Fragment, the Heartblood Ring, and the Phoenix Cinder, and we've talked about the general design of Blighted Boons, how their mechanics work, and what you need to keep in mind if you want to invent one for your own gaming table. So, the time has come for me to turn the conversation over to you. What do you think about these Blighted Boons, and would you use one of them at one of your games? Also, would you want to design a Blighted Boon, and if so, what kind of Blighted Boon would you design? Jump down to the comment section and let me know your thoughts. I think the narrative options here are pretty tantalizing, so I'd love to hear what you come up with. Don't forget to do all of that other stuff that helps support the channel. Remember to like, share, and subscribe. Check out my free Discord and Patreon. All of those links will be in the video description, along with a link to Archives of Nethys and the material that we've been discussing today. But, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for being part of the conversation. Happy Halloween.